Hello and welcome to episode 36 of the Filmumentaries podcast. This is Jamie Benning speaking to you from my half-built battle station's throne room here in southeast London. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. Please do check out my previous episodes in which I have conversations with some of the most talented and wonderful guests. I really have been lucky with the people that have agreed to come on the podcast and talk about their careers. I feel very fortunate. If you're a regular, welcome back. And you know the score. A good hour or so of film conversation ahead. If you're a patron on Patreon, take a bow. There are now 66 of you helping me fund my work. And it is work. It takes time and dedication and a whole lot of research. And I do love it. So thanks again for your continued support. It really does mean the world to me. I'm not one for expressing myself too well, But yeah, a heartfelt thanks to all of you that do support me on Patreon. If you're enjoying the podcast and would buy me a beer, I don't drink anymore, or a coffee, I'm actually off coffee. Okay, tea. If you were to meet me and buy a tea, then please do consider donating just $1 per episode. That's $24 a year. Or you can limit it to $1 per month, so $12. Yes, I am good at maths, aren't I? Thank you. All of the info you need is at patreon.com/Jamie Benning. That's JamieBenning. Not like Annette. She only has 2 N's in her surname. Silly old Auntie Annette. So for this episode, I went out into the wide world and actually did an in-person interview. First one since Ivor Powell, I guess, which was November 2019? That's like ancient history. I reached out to editor Sean Barton via IMDb Pro. Thank you to my in-laws for buying me that for Christmas. It's actually my first time using the site in that way, so that's a 1-for-1 hit rate so far. I've used it a couple of times in this past week as well, trying to sort out future episodes of the podcast. And Sean, as a hater of Zoom, was very gracious in inviting me to his house on the other side of London. Both of us are double vaccinated and LFTs were done beforehand, just to be sure. So I rocked up with 2 of my Zoom H2N mics, one purchased the day before because my spare failed to work, and a mic stand that I had from doing my demos here in my little office for EVS Broadcast. Also with me was a general list of topics that I wanted to talk about. And actually I only looked at the list for the first question and the rest of the conversation just flowed rather nicely. You'll hear a few noises of acknowledgement, more than you would normally from me. That's because we were sitting there kind of 2 meters apart, and when you are having a conversation with somebody in that manner, you do tend to yeah, sure, respond. So there's a bit more of that. I've tried to cut them out where possible, but there are a few left in. I hope you notice as well, it sounds like we're in a room. There's a roomy reverberance going on in there, a little echo, but it feels kind of natural, and I like that. If you don't know Sean by name, you'll certainly know him by his work. Sean edited the seminal cult film Quadrophenia for Frank Rodham. He then teamed up with Richard Marquand for Birth of the Beatles, which I've not seen. I'm going to try and hunt that down. Eye of the Needle as well, starring Donald Sutherland and Kate Nelligan. And then in 1981, they both began work on the last film of the Star Wars trilogy, a little independent film called Return of the Jedi. I think some of you may have heard of that. Both Richard and Sean worked together again on the psychological thriller Jagged Edge, starring Glenn Close and Jeff Bridges. I rewatched all of the above in preparation for the chat, minus the Beatles one. And I was surprised to find out how kind of fresh Jagged Edge still felt, actually. Of its time, yes, for sure, but it still works. And it was clearly the proto-erotic psychological thriller that led to that slew of them in the 90s. Despite the fact there isn't much eroticism in Jagged Edge. The writer, Joe Esterhaz, would of course go on to write Basic Instinct, Sliver and Showgirls, and if you've seen those, you know where he was headed. Richard Marquand became a very close friend of Sean's and sadly passed away in September 1987, just down the road from here in Royal Tunbridge Wells. Clearly a talented director who would have gone on to make more popular movies, I'm sure. He only made one more movie, in fact. So here's my chat with editor Sean Barton, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. So, Sean, what led to you entering the industry?
I was a high school dropout. I left school at 16 with no qualifications at all. Didn't know what I wanted to do. My parents were quite distraught, and I did lots of different jobs. Worked in catering, on building sites, drove vans, drove light trucks. And a friend of mine married a guy called Benny Lee, who started Lee Electrics, and he'd just started it. He was, he'd been a film electrician, he and his brother. And I think they took me on out of sympathy. And what happened was, you do that process, you carry the lights about, you put them where people want them, you point them as people want them, and then while they're shooting, you just stand there, watch you on sort of standby. And I thought, this isn't work, this is fun. And so after that I looked, and I got a job as a runner in a little editing company in Mayfair. And I was a bit old for a runner in those days, because runners were 16, I was 20. And and that was really just to get a union ticket. I hadn't thought of going into editing. I didn't know anything about it. It was quite easy to get in that direction, because no one had really thought about. Everybody who wanted to get into film wanted to be camera or directing. And so I found it. I really enjoyed it, and I think I had some sort of natural ability for it. I think sense of timing or something like that. I'm not quite sure, but I fell into it, and I worked for them for 2 years and started cutting a little bit for them, and then worked for a big commercials company, which had Ridley Scott was one of the directors. But then I got stuck there for about 10 years, 12 years, working for lots of different production companies. Got very bored with it. But it wasn't what I wanted to do, cut commercials. And I started a little post-production company with a couple of friends. And although I still did a lot of commercials, we started doing music videos and documentaries and various other bits and pieces. And then a friend of mine, Richard Longcrane, had made a film called Full Circle, and with Mia Farrow, a thriller. I think they've changed the name of it now. Rather good film. And it was a Canadian co-production, so it had to be cut in Canada. So they went away and finished it. Came back, decided to do some reshooting. And he asked me if I could do it, because I had the little facility. And I did, and everybody was very pleased with what I did on it. And I think out of that came another friend of mine who had written that, called Dave Humphreys, who's dead now. He started writing Quadrophenia with Frank Rodham, and Frank Rodham started shooting, and he was very unhappy with the editor he had. I don't know, I've never met him, I don't know anything about why, but these relationships are very important, and he wasn't happy, so I was recommended. He met me, and we chatted, and then we talked to the producers, who, in those days, it was very difficult to fire someone, so they didn't fire the other editor, they just left him at home on salary.
Right.
And so what they were worried about was they'd pick me up as well. And I said, no, I've got my own little business, so give me a couple of weeks, and if you don't like it, I'll go. And everybody did like it, and that was it. So.
And that was the film that kind of put you on the map, as it were. Yeah.
And I was also very lucky getting an agent. Another friend of mine recommended me to an agent. She was an agency producer, and at CCA, she knew him quite well. She'd worked with him a lot, used him a lot. And they saw Quadrophenia. He and his wife hated it because it was far too violent and a teenage for them. But he liked what I'd done on it, so he took me on. Because it's bloody hard to get an agent when you're starting. I was very lucky then.
It's one of those films, Quadrophenia, isn't it, that seems to reappear every so often, because I think everybody connects with it, because everybody goes through that kind of teenage angst.
Yes, yes.
Is that what you think is down to its longevity?
I think so, because I when it was, I'm trying to think how old I was when I made it. I was in my 30s. But when I'd been a teenager, that was the time it's set in.
Right.
And we used to go down to Brighton. And it was exciting and quite dangerous. And the whole, it was, so I did have a strong feeling for it. And I think that's helped a lot with it. And it was a very interesting experience because the Who had done they'd done Tommy and things like that, so they were very organised about how to present the music to me. And John Entwistle was the only one who ever came into the cutting room when I'd done something rather cheeky with the music. He would.
Oh, really? What was that?
He would have to approve it,
right,
or not.
So were you given a bit free rein with?
Oh, well, I swapped verses on
Did
songs
you?
and
Right.
things like that because it worked with the picture better.
Right.
And I'd present it to them. They could have said no, but they said, yeah, that works. They were very easy. They were very pleasant. There was one thing, I think, when the boys were arrested and put in the police van, I wanted to get out of a piece of music. And John Entwistle wouldn't have it. He said, it's so unmusical, you can't do that. It sounded all right to me. But I gave it, because he was, in fact, I think he was the one of the who could read music, and
right,
he was better educated musically than
Yeah. Had you had any background in music at all? Had you worked with music before? I suppose you've done the music videos, I guess.
And I'd learnt to cut, because nearly all music videos are too long. So the first thing you do is cut the song down a bit before you start. So and also in commercials, I'd learnt to cut music.
Yeah, it's a real skill, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people tend to think, oh, you just cut on the beat.
Oh, no,
but you don't, do you? It's an absolute no-no. You realise as soon as you do it that it doesn't work that way.
One of the problems with cutting on Avid is you can only cut a frame. And if you were cutting on film, you could cut to a sprocket hole, which is a quarter of a frame. So it's the difference between a 25th of a second and a 100th of a second.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
you could get a much better cut. So you really it's a matter of luck on Avid. So I can do it, and then I'll have to tell the sound editors, when they put it into their program, because they can go to a very tiny
bit more precision. Yeah, it's interesting you said about the commercial side of things, because almost everybody I've spoken to who are of your generation started in commercials, because it was a great It was like a film school in a way, because you had to do everything, and each commercial was its own movie, as it were.
Yes, some had dialogue. Some were quite good fun from that point of view, getting a balance of people talking and making something. Some purely cut to music. I used to do some for Adrian Lyne, and I had a sort of mad structure to them, because he would shoot a lot of stuff, and then they would choose the music, and you'd have to cut it to it. And cutting to music, if you're not careful, it's very bonkety-bonk, bonkety-bonk. And to break it up so it was interesting, but always rhythmic, it always worked. It was something you suddenly learnt by doing.
Yeah, I work in live television, so I'm used to cutting what we call a closer, the closing montage at the end of a football match or the end of a Formula One race. So it's ready to go within minutes of the race finishing.
And that pressure.
Yeah, it's quite a bit of pressure, but you do get a feeling for what cuts work and what don't. And you can always tell somebody who's new to it, because like I said, they will just cut on the beat. And as you say, it just feels...
Doesn't do it.
Yeah, it doesn't do it any justice.
It becomes very dull very quickly.
Yes, yeah. There's nothing to look forward to. I was going to ask you about Richard Marquand as well.
Yes.
Because, again, a lot of the people I've spoken to have ended up working with people multiple times, because you've got that shorthand between you. How did you first meet Richard?
Well, lucky break. He'd done one film, a horror film, and Anne Coates cut it, but they didn't get on at all. And so he didn't know what to do. But Brian Tofano, who lit Quadrophenia, knew him slightly, because they both worked at the BBC for years. Richard did a lot of documentaries for the BBC. And he said, I can't find an editor. And he said, well, the young guy on Quadrophenia was good. And so that's why I was called in.
Right.
And we hit it off straight away. Very funny, because I went to the interview and gave what I thought was quite a good presentation to another Englishman. But the American producer, Richard, said, I don't think we need to see anyone else. He went, hang on a minute, we'll be in touch. And I realised later, to him, I'd sounded like an idiot, because I hadn't sold nearly hard enough. Americans do expect that.
Right, yeah.
But we got on very well, and Frank Rodham and Richard, neither of them spent time in the cutting room. They expected me to cut, and then I'd show it to them. and we'd discuss what wasn't working for them or what they wanted out of a scene. Completely different approach to now.
Rather than telling you, snip this frame off or that frame off.
Never. And I'd say, do you think I would have shortened that? And they said, well, I don't know, that's your business. So it gave you, it was very enjoyable from that point of view. And Richard was very good like that. On that was Birth of the Beatles, a funny little ABC biopic of the Beatles. And I think it was a film of the week on Saturday night in America. And it was very enjoyable. And Dick Clark was the executive producer, who it meant nothing to me. Of course, then I was in America with him, and everybody would stop and shake his hand because he was so famous from American Bandstand. They'd grown up with him on Saturday nights, and he was very good to work with. I showed the film to the executives at ABC, and they said, "We don't know who's talking." And I looked at them, and I said, "You're talking about overlapped dialogue." And so I did a whole lump on the fact that, it was, if they wanted it to look like cheap television, why had they spent so much money on it? And everything was sort of budget. But in the end, they gave in on that. But another little interesting thing was they found the Liverpool accents too strong.
Right.
And they were actors, they weren't. So what we did, they wanted it all revoiced. What we did, we revoiced the first 20 minutes with the same actors, but with less of an accent. And you get your ear in, and then no one's ever complained after that, which I've used since. And it just came to me, and I saw Richard Pryor in concert, and it was to a mainly black audience, and it was really sort of Los Angeles black patois. And it took me 20 minutes to really get it. Then once I'd got it, I was fine. And so I realised, that's, it's that bit to get used to an accent, or a strong accent.
You have to tune yourself into it,
It takes your brain a little while.
Yeah. Was there a danger in having done Quadrophenia and having done the Beatles movie as well, that you were going to be kind of, typecast into being a music editor?
Well, I was thinking that, and then I don't know what I did in between. But Richard got Eye of the Needle almost straight away, which I loved. It was great fun. And so that was really good. Yeah. Proper, it was a proper film.
Yeah.
And it had some good actors in it too. And very nicely written by the screenwriter, because I think the book is a bit turgid, although it's got quite a good plot, which is perfect for a film. A good screenwriter.
It's got real atmosphere, that film, I think.
Yeah.
Donald Sutherland, isn't it? Great performance.
Good. And so that really I was really pleased with that. And then we were sort of off,
Yeah. And that was the film that kind of drew the eyes of George Lucas, was it?
We showed him the first graded print.
Right. Was that quite a rare thing to show somebody other than...
it was because he was interested.
Yeah, right, yeah. Here we go.
A nice house of print, and so we showed that. We took it, I think we took it to Elstree to show him.
So was he, he would have been on Raiders or something like that at that time, maybe.
And it took a little time, but he was very keen on Richard. And he also liked Richard because Richard didn't know anything about visual effects, which sounds sort of illogical, but in some ways not. The last thing you want is when you've got this machine like ILM ready to go, you don't want someone coming in thinking they know how to do it.
Yeah.
Richard went in purely as a creative director, shooting, getting performances. And there were other people who, said, I mean, some of it is extremely tedious. I persuaded George that we didn't need a second unit director after there was one sequence where the Ewoks catch them and take them back to their camp. Well, the second unit director was very capable. I can't remember his name now, but offhand, but you can look him up. Shot an enormous amount of footage for it. Richard had shot the main stuff, but there was another 250,000 feet of film, and it took forever just to find a way through it. And so we talked, and I said to George, I don't think we really need second unit directing from now on, because I can do pickups and you know about the blue screen and everything else. So that's what we did. He did all the blue screen.
Right, yeah.
Which is very hard work. You come out at the end of the day with your eyes not focusing after.
Oh, really? Did you go on set for Return of the Jedi?
Yes, well, we were all at Elstree.
Yeah, right. You were based there.
I've always gone. Very important to me that you have relationships with the camera crew and the sound department and the continuity, because if there are problems, if they know who you are and if you've told them that their work is good and you like it, then when you have a problem, it's very different from someone they don't know telling them something's wrong with their work and where they
yeah, sure.
I've always done this. If you can get, so for instance, focus pullers, which is an incredibly difficult job. You get a big complicated move, with a shallow field of focus, and when it's very political, because when they want to go again because they're pretty sure it's not quite right, and everyone else is cross because everyone else liked what they did, and the first AD wants to get on with the next shot. Quite a difficult job, and so if you can whisper to them and say, I didn't write about such and such, or that worked really well, it can be a big relief to them. The next day I can go on the set and say, oh, by the way, that big camera, that complicated move, that worked really well. It was all,
yeah.
And I think that it's what I call the politics of film, which I think are quite important.
Yeah, it's a big part of it, isn't it? I can imagine if you hadn't had that rapport with the crew, just rocking up on a day and saying, "Oh, mate, by the way, your shot was out of focus yesterday."
Exactly.
It wouldn't work. Yeah.
Because one would react like that oneself.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I was wondering, given that the editor really crafts the performance of an actor, I'm surprised always that actors don't have closer relationships with editors. Because you can really make or break careers in the editing room.
You can, but one hopes one's making their performance better.
Yeah.
Because you can change the time. And I did a film years later, Fly 2. And the director, he was very experienced at puppeteering and things. It was his first film. And he did it perfectly well, but the lead actor had a whole lot of funny little facial movements and things that he did before he started talking. And I'd gone through, I don't like those, so I cut them out, you see. And it meant it slightly limited the way I had to cut. But the director hadn't seen any of it, and after rushes one day, he said, I'm so worried about them. There's all these little mannerisms and tics, I really hate them. I said, oh, I've cut them all out. What? Yeah, it hadn't occurred to him that it would be possible.
Yeah, right. And it was better for that, was it?
Yes, it was, because it would have affected, and it would have made the actor look less competent.
I guess that sometimes happens in reverse, that you see these little moments where they're not acting, and you might just catch a little glance or something that suddenly works in that scene that you're working on.
It's a thing with dialogue scenes where often when we cut on film, the director would be a maximum of 3 or 4 takes, and probably only print 2 in colour and the rest would be in black and white because it was cheap. So I never saw the NG ones, the ones that were. And then when Avid came along, because it was so cost effective to shoot all the negative on video, all of it, and then give it to me, I saw all this stuff I'd never seen before. And I'd still do my first cut with the selected takes, with the ones at the... But then I could look through and find something might have happened, an NG take, it might halfway through a light went. But the first half is really wonderful. And I would never have seen it before. So that's one of the nice things of Avid.
Yeah.
And that producers have always believed that Avid would speed up the process, because it just meant you'd go in deeper.
Yes, or you'd have 12 different versions on your... Yeah. I was going to ask you about that, actually. Do you sort of wish for the days of film editing since Avid came along? Was there more discipline involved?
I think I've been pondering this a lot lately, because one of the things is that the only cut existing was that cut. So when I did my cut and I showed it to the director and we worked on his cut, mine disappeared.
Right.
And so now one of the nice things is it does still exist, and you can do variations. And the last film I did, the Postcard Killings, there was a scene with a long scene, and they're interviewing, police are interrogating two people separately, and I cut it as per the script, and it worked fine. And the director said, I wonder if we could just sort of break it up a bit. But so I had that cut, and so I could put that to one side and I could play and break it up and make it much more interesting. But I could always go back to the other one, the sort of clean cut as per script still existed. So that's a great advantage. Sometimes I've had things where I did a nice film, Tracker, shot in New Zealand, and when I came back to England, I brought drives back, but they were copies, and I left everything in the machine in New Zealand until I got back and had mounted them on an Avid in London, make sure everything was all right. And while I did that, the producers saw my cut behind my back and behind the director's back, and you shouldn't do it. And they think they don't understand this, but it's so important because they know the script, the producers, they have seen the rushes. They shouldn't say anything till they see the director's cut, because their first impression is terribly important. We've been drowned in film for months, and so they go, oh, where's that scene? Oh, I really missed that. And so it can be really useful feedback. They always think that you're being sort of secretive. But it's part of, I keep on saying to you, it's part of the process. Then afterwards, if you want, you can see my cut. But it's not secretive, it's the way the process works best, because you get this feedback from them who haven't been drowned in film. And their first thing, some of it you might not agree with, but some of it is really, and you thought, well, we took that out because of why. And,
Yeah, you need that sort of first visceral reaction to it, don't you? Do you think moving to digital from film has kind of stripped away a bit of the mystique of what you do? Because now everybody essentially has an editor in their pocket, don't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You used to have it was incredibly male-dominated. It's much better now. But I'd have a first, a second, and a third assistant, and the third would sync the rushes and rubber number them. They put so that the sound and the picture had matching numbers every foot. And a second would be, second would be syncing them, and they'd be filing them away as I was cutting. The bins there'd be bins full of film, and they'd be going through, putting them all back where they should be. And the first would run like the cutting run, and so if you were an outsider, you came through these several rooms to the inner sanctum, which was where I was. And I don't think they really knew what I did. And now every producer's got a program on their laptop, and they all think, everybody thinks. And also, not a negative thing, but because so many people have been to film school and they end up as producers or directors, but they feel, they probably do know a fair amount about editing, which just makes my life much harder.
Yes. Have you ever had any producers, send you a quick time of what they think is the right thing?
I have, their cut of my film.
Really? Bloody hell.
And the director went crazy, but I said, he doesn't mean any harm. He's a very nice man. But I was exactly that, a quick time of, yes.
Quite jarring, I would think. Yeah. Going back to Return of the Jedi, what would this be, 1981, I guess, when you were engaged on that. How did that feel that you were about to, get on board on one of the most eagerly awaited films of a generation?
Richard said before he got it, he went over to Los Angeles anyway, and he was seeing his agents over there and looking for work. He always felt that the director should be looking for the next job rather than being in the cutting room. And he said to me, look, if I get it, and George says, I can't have you, I'm afraid I won't. I said, well, you'd be mad to turn down a film because you couldn't have the editor you wanted. I said, of course not, I understand that. And then he phoned me and he said, I've got it. And he said, if you came over at your own cost and met George, and we'll see if we can work something. So I did. And it was, I don't know if anyone remembers it, a strike of air traffic controllers in America.
Right, yeah.
And Reagan, I think, had fired them all. So I got on a plane in San Francisco, and it stopped in New York. And they said to everybody, oh, we'll put you on another plane the next day. Turn up at 10:30. I thought, I didn't believe that. So I got there at the crack of dawn, and of course there wasn't a plane, but I begged and pleaded and almost wept, and they actually bumped me into first class on a flight across there. But I talked to George, and we got on quite well, and so he said I could do it. So that was incredibly exciting, yes. And there were 12 weeks at Elstree Studios, and then we moved across. And before we went, I asked George if I could have a black and white print made of my cut so we could send them separately, just in case. And he said, yeah, it was a good idea. And everything was fine, and so I was working on it. And Richard had always left me alone, but on this particular thing, he was because it was so important to him, I understood. He kept on pushing me to cut it faster and cut it faster. No, that's not what they're like. In fact, they're very conventionally cut. George was quite a stickler for the rules of editing. And when we had a screening of his cut, it went down really badly. And I thought, well, I'll probably be on a plane home. And as luck would have it, George was being shown, I'd given my black and white print to the sound people, and they were experimenting with voices and alien languages. And I think they showed him scene in Jabba the Hutt's palace. And he said, what am I looking at? And they said, oh, this is Sean's original cut. And he told me this. He said, that's why you're still on it, because I like that.
Oh, really? Interesting. So what had the feedback been up to that point? Why did it go so badly?
Because no one had seen it before. It was cut too fast. It was gone. I don't know why we'd got into this. Richard decided that they went like gangbusters, and they don't actually. They're quite conventional. We'd have discussions, George and I, about things, because he was film school trained. There's a thing, I think, where Luke's on the end of this gangplank looking down onto this monster in the pit, and we're looking at him, and behind him is the ship. And he said, whose point of view is that? And I said, it's the audience's. They need to see where everything is. He said, yes, I suppose you're right. Because to him, we should have only seen his back.
Right.
He was quite pedantic about it.
Yeah. But that would have been a multiple camera setup, I would think, over in Yuma, Arizona.
Yes.
So you obviously had a lot of choices in the edit.
Yes.
And was that quite jarring for Richard as well? Because he was probably a bit more used to being creative.
He always worked with one camera, and he moved a camera very well. He was very, very good at it. And so we had 3. The trouble with 3 is the third one is not a lot of use most of the time. If you're not careful, it's looking at one of the other cameras.
Well, yeah, or it's crossing the line.
Crossing the line, so you end up using a shot from it. You have to flop it because everybody, people are looking at the wrong.
There are a few flop shots, actually, aren't there? When they arrive on those skiffs to the pit there. Yeah. I think that whole interaction between Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill is flipped, presumably because they shot that at ILM. And
well, I can't remember. I had to flop things sometimes.
Yeah.
It was. So none of that would have happened if we hadn't had 3 cameras. If we had 2 even, we could have done it, because they could have been, you can have them side by side, but with different lenses. So you can get really...
Yeah. Yeah. You've got to make sense of it spatially, haven't you, somehow? I was listening to an interview with an editor I think it was on Roger Deakins' podcast, and he was saying that, he's flopped shots before, and everybody goes, yeah, but the lighting's changed, it's on the wrong side. And he said, yeah, but they're talking to somebody in the completely different direction if I leave it in as it is. So you have to make sense of it. And the audience are more likely to notice a shot that doesn't work in that way than if it's flopped.
They are aware of when the lines cross. They don't know why, but it takes them out of the film. There's a lovely scene in Selma where Martin Luther King and his wife are sitting talking in a sort of darkened room, and it's about their alienation and their relationship, and they cross the line all the time, and it's wonderful because it actually makes you realise their separation.
Yeah, right.
And that's the only time I've ever seen it work. I think it can be very confusing sometimes to a punter. You've gone to the movies and you've just taken out of it. Everybody's looking in the wrong direction.
There were quite a few deleted scenes in Return of the Jedi. There was the sandstorm scene.
Yes.
Which
we just didn't need.
It didn't need it, yeah, right. It was one of the first scenes shot, I think,
That's
as well.
Right,
yeah.
It was amazing. Cause people, it was a real sandstorm inside a set.
Yeah. And it was seeing our heroes sort of reunited again for the first time since the previous film.
And I had cut it. I did cut it. But we didn't need it. I think this often happens with film. Eye of the Needle is a series of the policeman chasing him to get to the island. And we dropped several of them, and the actor was really upset because he thought it was criticism of his acting. And we said, no, we just didn't need them. It slowed the film down. We needed the balance.
I've heard some editors talk about how they don't visit sets because they don't want to get involved in that, it took them 5 hours in the rain to make this shot, and then are reluctant to snip it out.
Well, that's directors always, they remember how difficult it was.
But you're still willing to cull it, even if,
It's story. It's all about story.
Yeah.
So you have to kill your babies to be a good writer.
Yes,
it's true of film as well. You have to say it.
Yeah.
I know it's a nice scene, but we don't need it.
Yeah,
It's hard sometimes.
Yeah.
And producers hate it because they think we wasted all this money shooting it. Why did we do that? And because often, if you, in the middle of a shoot, producers often ask you if you can drop a scene. And I sometimes you can, but I say most of the time, the point is you don't know what you don't need till you've finished.
Yes.
You've got a script that works. It's just not that easy.
So you worked with Marsha Lucas and Dwayne Dunham also on Return of the Jedi. Had you worked collaboratively with other editors before?
And I mean, I did all the first cut, the director's cut, and Marsha recut the love scenes. I'd cut them quite briskly because I think small boys don't like seeing people kissing very much.
Yeah.
But I'm obviously wrong. And she also extended the death of the Emperor. I think, for me, it didn't work, but it was, fine. Dwayne really assisted George, and the two of them worked. Mainly, the big thing they did was the bike chase.
Right.
I'd done a first assembly of it, and then they worked on that. And they put in lots of little Ewok scenes at the end that had been shot later. But Marsha was she's a great editor, but she wanted to take control more and more. And actually, I have to say, George defended me very strongly and said, you can make it different, you won't make it better, which was nice.
Well, I guess their relationship at that point was quite strained or over, was it? Yeah, at that point,
I read recently that they had already decided to divorce, but he said, let's wait until we finish the film.
Oh, really? Yeah, interesting. And I think she's often seen amongst Star Wars fans as the person that sort of kept George in check in some way.
But also, I think George is quite a quiet gentleman. He's got a very strong personality, but he's quite shy. And I think the two of them together made a very good team because she was much more pushy, and she's a very good editor. But she was. People are very different because I love the music side of film. And Taxi Driver had who did the music for Taxi?
Bernard Herrmann, wasn't it?
Herrmann. And I said to her, did you meet him? Did you go to the... She said, no, I didn't. I never go for music recording.
Really?
I said, I would have crawled across broken glass to see Bernard Herrmann.
That's a hell of a score as well. Bloody hell. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yes. I think it was his last score, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I spoke to a guy called Dan Perry who designed that title sequence for Taxi Driver, and we talked about that score and just how it kind of sets you up for the feeling of that film.
Oh yes.
I mean, it gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. It's
Yes,
fantastic.
brilliant.
Yeah. And married with that imagery that they shot and Dan designed, the title sequence and everything. It just, I remember showing that film to some friends of mine who aren't really film fans. I said, look, this is one of the films you have to see. And within 15 minutes, they said, I don't want to watch it. It's too, I know something terrible is going to happen because of those very things,
Yes, you're right, yes. No, it's a lovely score.
Is there something that gives you real joy in editing? Like, are there any moments where you think, this is why I do this?
Well, I think there's a couple of bits, several parts of Jagged Edge, which I really love.
Great film. I watched it again yesterday.
I love that score too.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
One of them, which on the radio going about her finding the typewriter.
Yes.
And
when you hold on that shot.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Antonio Kirk was asking me. I said, I don't know how. That was how long I thought it should be.
Yeah.
And the whole process. She said, the way you find. I said, well, it seemed to me obvious that you would see her doing this, and then she sees something, and you just see a glimpse. You think, well, she's thinking, what's that? You're thinking, what's that?
Yeah.
And then it develops from there. And obviously the Fist Through the Door, which is very satisfying to see a whole cinema jump in the air.
Yeah.
And another bit I've always liked is when she's leaving his house and he talks to her and she says that her son's ill. And she's got the typewriter under the coat.
Yeah, you can just see
I
it.
said I wanted an insert of it. And the first assistant director said, we all said that, he said, I think it should be from her point of view. And I said, oh no, it should be from his point of view. Because you never see him look at it.
No.
But if you see it and you know where it is, you're waiting for him to see it.
Yeah.
It raises the tension enormously.
It does, yeah. You dread that moment, don't you? You think she's not going to get out of there, yeah.
And but also part of the big point, the Fist Through the Door, through the window, is the music, and that's John Barry, because what he does is he resolves it beforehand. And you go, that's all right. And then it happens.
Yeah.
And I've persuaded composers to do that since with very dramatic moments, because you can, it's very powerful. And I just loved working with John Barry. I did a nice, after Jedi we did quite a small French sort of love story until September, which was destroyed by the studio really. It was much grittier to start with, and they gradually whittled it down. But John Barry, that was the first time I'd met him, and just the way he placed music, the spotting session, normally I would run it and the composer and the director would be sitting there and we'd run them on a Steenbeck, and I'd say, should it start here? And I'd take notes. And he always had better ideas about where to start and where to end. And the lovely thing he would do a lot is, say there's a tense scene and you go to another scene that isn't tense, the music would carry on and change its tone into the next scene before it disappeared. Very clever stuff.
Because I guess most of the time your pictures are edited and then the music is added, but that sounds like a much more collaborative kind of effort with John. Was there ever an instance where he then said, actually, this would work better, and you had to go and recut, or is it too late?
No, he would make it work, and what I found particularly interesting is his music comes to pieces very easily, and so after we'd done it, we recut the film twice to make changes, because I think they thought it was too sexy and too gritty, and so I could cut his music really easily. And I showed him rather shamefacedly, and he rather laughed. He thought it was really, he said, and it was partly because he'd planned it. He was so knowledgeable about music. I like the fact that he was he was called up. He was old enough to be called up, as Richard Marquand was, and they both did that short service commission. Instead of the 2 years, you do 3.
Right.
But you have much more choice and you have much more fun, rather than sweeping an aircraft hangar in Norfolk.
Yeah.
Richard went Hong Kong and in the Air Force, I think, and,
that's right,
and actually started presenting on TV there. And John, of course, went into a military band. And he knew so much about brass. And also he'd learned, I think over 3 years they'd taught him a lot of composing, and he always wanted to be a film composer because his father ran or owned cinemas in Yorkshire.
Right.
And enough, Trevor Jones is another one who I've worked with, and I loved his work. But he also told me that when he was about 4, someone took him to the cinema and he knew what he wanted to do.
Did you have a moment like that? Did you have a...
I always loved film. No, it was really... as I say, I fell into it.
Yeah. But there wasn't a film where you that you saw as a kid and just kind of fell in love with?
I think there were... Actually, more... One of the ones... I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's that film version of The Turn of the Screw. It was scary. I was about 16. I went with a girlfriend who was stony-faced through it, and I was clinging to her. And I was so aware of the power of what was happening, how I was being manipulated successfully by the editing and by the composition and the plot.
It's incredible, isn't it, that film is able to do that? It can change your day.
It
can change your week, can't it? And that's, I think, what you did with Jagged Edge was fantastic. I mean, not only was it one of the first psychological thrillers of that era that went on to be very successful. I mean, it was a #1 movie for a while. It made a good amount of money and led to those films like Indecent Proposal and Basic Instinct and all those things. What I found interesting watching it back the other night is there are some quite bold cuts in it, some quite bold edits where there's the main character in one scene, in one set, and then it cuts to the same person but in a different...
Oh, I quite like that.
Yeah, yes. I did. I find that quite... Well, it's quite bold, but I don't know. It's something quite enjoyable about that because it's not...
I'll go out of my way to make sure they're in the same place.
Yes, I noticed that because the eye is taken to that place and the background changes.
I've watched directors looking at me in amazement because I've either got my finger on the monitor or because I want to follow from one scene to the other, and it should be flawless to the eye. It's a gimmick, but
it works, doesn't it? Because I think there's a tendency sometimes to think, oh no, a dissolve is needed there because there's a passage of time. But it really keeps it immediate, doesn't it? Yeah, and I think that's what's really really cool about your editing. I spoke to another editor the other day, Colin Gowdy, and he was saying what a brilliant editor you are.
Right,
and he said,
he's done pretty well for
himself. He's done all right, Colin, yeah. Are there any films that you were offered that you turned down that you knew you could have done a better job of? But let's not name the film.
Not so much that, but there's one... that I'm trying to think of it, the director who made Priscilla, Queen of the Desert.
Yes.
He made a film originally when I was interviewed for it. It was called Big Red, but it was renamed later Welcome to Whoop Whoop. But when I read it was the best script I'd ever read. It was Pulp Fiction, but it wasn't about gangsters. It was about a man who was sort of sleazebag, American sleazebag, and he was smuggling rare birds back to America, and he gets caught up in this thing. He gets drunk and finds he's married, and he's out. And I just thought it was the most wonderful script. And he'd cut Priscilla, Queen of the Desert himself. So I think it was the first film he was going to have an editor on. And he was in his 20s, and I was probably in my 50s. And he just couldn't... I knew what he was up. I was up against. He didn't want his father cutting his film.
Right.
And I understood it. I agree with it.
Yeah.
But I never heard of it again. And I was working in Australia on a Hallmark miniseries of with Frank Rodham, on Moby Dick, rather nice one with Patrick Stewart.
Yes, and Henry Thomas, wasn't it? Yeah.
I like that. And someone on the crew, I mentioned this, I said, I never heard of it again. They said, oh, no, but it's called Welcome to Whoop Whoop. Oh, right. And then I think in the Observer one Sunday was an article by the writer of the original screenplay saying he had seen it at the Edinburgh Film Festival and it was a musical. And he said, I hadn't written a musical, and I thought, I hadn't read one. And it was only one screening, it's never been seen since. So, and I wanted to do it so much. And there's a quote of Billy Zane. I did a film which he directed, which has never been released for very complicated reasons. But we'd go for a coffee to Bar Italia in Soho, and young actors or actresses would all, they'd go and he'd go and talk to them for a little while. And walking back, and I said, "What do you say to them?" Because I'd never have anything to do. I just sort of wandered away. He said, "Rejection is divine intervention. If you can't accept rejection, you can't be an actor." Because it's true. He said, if you start worrying that it's your fault, he said, it's you have to accept that when you don't get a part, you shouldn't have gotten that part. And so I started thinking, I said, well, it works for editors as well. I'm sure everybody in film and theatre and so several things like that. I did a Chucky film.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
Well, but I'm not. My name's not on it.
Oh, right.
And I was surprised I got it. I went for the interview, and I was pretty sure I hadn't got it. And then I did get it, and I thought, that's very funny. Because I've been, you go for so many interviews, you start to get a good idea of it. And what it happened was, it was shot in Romania, which I'd been to before. I did a Zeffirelli film there, which was great fun. And it was a very strange atmosphere all the way through. The director wouldn't look me in the eye, and I was quite despondent. And then finally, after 13 weeks, basically 11 weeks shoot, after 13 weeks they were still shooting, they sent me back to London to get the cutting room in London set up and fired me. And I realised afterwards that they'd never wanted me, but the person they wanted, they couldn't get green lit.
Right.
So the producer said, well, we'll get shot.
They used you.
I got the money for 30
Yeah,
years,
well.
so I didn't have to have my name on a Chucky film. That's quite good.
Again, it worked out for the best.
But I felt very sorry for the director because he was a gentle, nice man. And obviously why he wouldn't look me in the eye is he knew that was part of the plan,
Right.
and it wasn't the sort of thing that he would do.
Right.
But when they moved back to London, he saw me nearly every day, and he was slunk.
Cowering away. You've worked in almost every genre, I think.
Yes.
Is there one that you prefer?
Well, I like thrillers very much. I like Jagged Edge and Eye of the Needle. I really did enjoy them a lot. I've always wanted to do more westerns. I've done one which has never been released in England,
Right.
called War Party, which is sort of modern western.
What attracts you to a western then?
Something about the landscape, because
Yeah.
it was lovely. We shot for sort of 3 months on a Blackfoot reservation in Montana.
Oh, it's beautiful
It was
out there, isn't it? I've been in
lovely.
Montana, yeah.
And it was a modern western. And I realised afterwards that Americans aren't interested in American Indians now. They're only interested in the romantic past of them. So it didn't do any business in America. And because it didn't do any business, good business in America, the English distributor just didn't bother. And I think they were wrong, because I thought that was the end of it. And I was working in Germany, and the woman doing continuity said, "Oh, my boyfriend's a DOP and he loves War Party." I said, "Really?" And apparently it did really good business in Europe.
Oh, really? Right.
But for some reason was never released in England.
It's funny, isn't it, how these films go on and have these lives elsewhere that you don't know about. And you can't always put your finger on the reasons why.
I think that's the main one, because a couple of others made at the same time. One called Pow Wow Highway, and that disappeared as well. And a couple of years ago, there was a lovely film called Wind River.
Yeah.
I love that.
That was a
film.
great film.
That did no business.
That scene by the caravans where they're all pointing the guns at each
And
other.
that time jump,
Yeah.
when she knocks on the door.
Yes, yeah. So good.
So wonderful.
Yeah. I had that thing where I realised I've been holding my breath.
Yes. Oh, it's fantastic.
Yeah, really good. Again,
Love that film.
it sort of disappeared, didn't it?
It didn't do any business.
I think I saw that as an early screening, because a friend of mine works for the BBC and he reviews films for local radio, so I sometimes go along. And we saw that and I was telling everybody, this is going to be huge, this film.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
And
disappeared.
the same writer, he wrote and directed that. He wrote Hell and High Water, which I also liked a lot.
That was good, yeah.
Jeff Bridges is very good at it. And,
Yeah.
and the whole the two brothers, the mad one, fabulous performance, because every time you see him, you're quite on the edge.
Yes,
you don't know what's going to...
That's right, yeah.
Really nice.
Yeah. Do you find yourself as an editor you have this interesting relationship with actors in that you get to see all of their intimate moments, but it's not a reciprocal one.
No.
Like, I would imagine cutting something like Jagged Edge with those two wonderful actors, main actors in it, Glenn Close and Jeff Bridges, that you do kind of fall in love with them in a way.
Oh, yes, and I thought they were, because they were wonderful.
Yeah, there's some really naturalistic, spontaneous moments in that film.
And there are, and both of them were, well, and obviously she's a very skillful and trained actress, and he's not. He learnt by doing. But when there's a scene where they're walking on the beach, and because you're cutting one, you had to redo the voices, and she did it fine. But he's the only actor I've ever come across who could exactly remember his original performance.
Really?
Because I'm normally a bit disappointed when I have to revoice people, because there's something about, of course, there's a difference between when they are in the scene doing it than when they're sitting in a booth looking at themselves doing it. It's a huge difference. It's very hard for actors. But it used to be much more difficult than it is now. People are much more successful. But he's the only one who could exactly remember it.
Huh. Because it was able to tap into that spontaneity somehow. Yeah.
But they were lovely to work with. They were both very friendly and nice. And there was a mutual hatred of the producer, Marty Rancerhoff, who was a monster. But, he's got a great track record. I can say all this because he's dead. But he was a monster. It's quite scary. He was one of the sort of robber baron sort of thing. But he made some very good films. He made 10 Rillington Place, for instance.
Yeah, right.
And but he didn't want Glenn because he thought she wasn't fluffy enough.
Right.
He wanted someone sort of cuter, which wouldn't have worked because
No.
you believe in her completely as a lawyer.
There is something about the way she acts that you can't quite tell what's going on in her mind. She's there's something in her eyes. I couldn't put my finger on it. But there's also like those moments where she stood on the balcony and she's like playing with her hair, looking down on him, and you just think, oh, she's stunning. She's gorgeous. Yes. And him as well. Like, you can't take your eyes off him.
No. It was a very funny little thing. Richard Marquand and I were both, if you looked at us, you'd think we could a bit short in the leg. And he came along to show us this Savile Row suit that arrived and put it on, and he just looked bloody amazing. And Richard said to me, he was standing there, Richard said to me, if our legs were as long as his, we'd look like him. And he's listening to us. I said, no, we'd look better, but we wouldn't look like him. Because he really was, he can look amazing.
Yeah.
And there's something about, he's one of those actors who, their presence is very powerful. But the two of them are very nice to work with,
Yeah. What was it like editing the performances of Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill and Harrison Ford? There's still people that, Harrison is obviously gone on to greater heights than almost any actor. And it was interesting to see Mark return in the more recent Star Wars movies and a couple of other movies that he's been in recently.
I have to say that at the time, none of them were on their best form. And there's a scene with her where she tries to get Harrison, she comes to get him out of his freezing.
Yes.
And thank Lord she was in that helmet, because she'd been up all night.
Really?
And she was in a terrible state. It's very sad, because when she was straight, she was the cleverest, funniest, most charming woman. But it was hard going. They parted pretty hard on the film.
Yeah, you do get that sense.
And I don't think Harrison liked Richard for some reason.
Really?
There was a certain amount of tension there.
There is a bit in one of the making-ofs, I think it's from Star Wars to Jedi, the making of a saga, where Harrison and Richard are talking, and Harrison says, I'll try and do it without moving my lips, just in case you decide not to use it.
Good God.
And I always thought as a kid watching that, I thought, oh, there's something going on there in that relationship,
Yeah.
And there's also another bit where Richard is talking to Mark Hamill about what a star Jabba is becoming, and Mark's just looking at the floor. And again, something seems off.
Right. Jabba was a wonderful thing. Jabba had two men doing his eyes. One of them was opened and closed the eyelids and turned the eyes on electronics, and the other man changed the size of the iris.
Yeah.
And there were two men inside, one doing one arm, one doing the other. And there was a dwarf inside shaking the tail.
Yeah. It's bizarre, isn't it?
Yes. And
I've spoken to all of those guys, actually. Toby Philpott was the left hand, Dave Barclay was the right hand.
Very different.
And Mike Edmonds was in the tail. But I made a short video about Jabba some years ago, interviewing Toby, who was the left hand and the head. And it went viral because people didn't think he was a puppet somehow, because he's such a believable character.
Yes. And they had a little tiny black and white TV inside.
Yeah. And they said that camera was way off in the rafters, so they couldn't necessarily see what they were doing.
Very clever.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, it was given direction as if it was an actor.
Yeah.
Richard would talk to it about what.
Yeah, I've seen clips of Rich says, "Okay, Jabba, give me a laugh." Yeah, yeah. But they asked him to do that. Apparently, they asked him.
Oh, right.
Because they didn't want to have him sort of break it down, you know. And now, Toby, move your left hand, and Dave, move your right hand, because then it would all sort of fall apart. Yeah. But no, there are some great moments in that movie. I think, you know, I saw that at 7 years old. It was my birthday. I was taken to London. I went to Hamleys and bought the toys, you know, and it is fixed. I was the perfect age to see that film. It appeared to have something for everyone. And there's a lot of derision about the Ewoks and stuff in later years by a lot of fans. But I think I still holds a place in my heart, definitely. Is there anything in that film in particular that, you know, you feel kind of proud of? Or can't you slice and dice it in that way? I can't
slice and dice, but some of the scenes, I'm pleased it flows very well. You know, there's, as I said, most of it I cut. I would think the final film 75%.
Really?
Yeah.
Was there more to that last scene where Luke and Vader are fighting? Because I noticed years ago.
In fact, I thought she extended it too much, Marsha.
But I noticed at one point, I think Vader's holding Luke's lightsaber, yet we don't see how he gets that. Or maybe it's just a trick of the eye. But yeah, I just wondered if there was anything missing.
If I did, that's my fault.
I was going to ask you actually about music editing a moment ago when you were talking about John Barry, because Colin Gowdy was saying when he edited Rogue One, the Star Wars movie, he got all of the original Star Wars movies without the score. You know, well, it had the score on a separate track and the effects on a separate track. And he was amazed at how sloppy some of the music edits were.
Oh, yes.
And he said, because they're all hidden under explosions. But how do you go about doing an effective music edit in a film that doesn't afford you that opportunity?
We didn't with that one. We shot the music at Abbey Road. And we ran out of time and had to go to Barnes. But it's pretty tight. You know, it was all done to picture, and that was the lock picture. And then I think they got a guy called Roger Savage over from Australia, an English guy, who to mix down the music in California. But no, I didn't. His music's pretty wonderful, I think.
Yeah.
John Williams is a fantastic thief as well, because
I
mean, a good one, you know.
Yeah.
Because no one could produce that amount with vast musical knowledge he's got. And when beginning of that session, I found myself in one of the breaks humming Finkel's Cave to myself. And the guy who was in charge of it, the head of music at Fox, said, "Stop that." And I've always thought there's a bit it's in there somewhere, because it just came out of nowhere.
Yeah. I find myself humming Holst's The Planets, because obviously he borrowed a lot from that. Let's say in that first movie.
Fantastic. And of course the Star Wars theme is nicked from a 30s movie.
Yeah, like a Corn Gold.
Corn Gold.
Yeah.
Corn Gold.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. I mean, I don't denigrate it at all. And in fact, John Barry said if he was pleased when people stole from him.
Really?
And he said, it's the better flattery.
Yeah, I bet. When you cut a film when you do your first cut, to the script, to the director's requirements. How important do you think it is if you have a different idea to go and do your own cut?
Well, it matters very much how well my relationship with the director.
Yeah, I
so
can
if
imagine.
I've never worked with the director before. I would cut as per the script and then talk to them. But with Richard and with Frank Rodham, I would do exactly what I felt like.
Because they put their trust in you to do your job.
Did, and they would, and I could trust them not to be angry about it or anything like that.
Because I can imagine some directors are quite precious.
It's the most exciting bit, the first cut. And you're going in there and you don't... I don't really know what I've done by the time I've done it. I used to like not to look at it too much afterwards. When we shot on film, it would go into a can and I wouldn't see it for weeks. And I used to say the cut got better in the dark. Because when you just cut a film, all you can see is the cuts. And are they right and are they wrong? But if you've gone on and you've cut other stuff and you come back and look at it, you see it's a bit more distance. But that's the most exciting bit, I think.
I always imagine it must be quite hard doing something like a comedy or maybe even a thriller, because you're so used to where that cut is and where that moment, that shock moment's going to happen, or where that joke happens. How do you manage to step back from that and still see it as funny or as tense?
Well, that's the thing. Very interesting, that, particularly about comedy, because people get used to the jokes and they start thinking they don't work. Yeah. And I said, we laughed. When we first saw it, we laughed.
So you have to remember that first reaction.
You have to remember it, because, and I've had real battles with this where people have said, it's not funny, it doesn't work. But everybody loved it. You've just seen it 10 times. No joke's funny the 10th time, you know.
But then weirdly, sometimes the 20th time it is funny again.
It is funny, yeah. But I'm quite good at that. I mean, I can keep that up. I think film is a very emotional medium. For instance, in emotional scenes, it's embarrassing really, but I can watch it 10 times and I can find a little, wetness in one eye. And that works.
Yeah, right.
It makes me cry. It works.
Yeah. It seems to me that the best editors are people who can do that, as well as having the technical understanding of the editing process and being able to create a rhythm and understand pacing, but also have that kind of gut feeling.
I think so.
Yeah.
And I don't... It's not an intellectual process to me at all. It's an emotional process. And I think films... You respond to film emotionally. I don't think you respond intellectually to film.
So how do you stay ahead of the increased sophistication of the audience with something like a thriller? The audience is sort of ahead of you, guessing what's going to happen next. So how do you...
Well, they've got to be bloody well written, haven't they?
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
I think Jagged Edge, several women have said to me, they so much don't want it to be him.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Antonia Quirk said that on the radio. I was playing that yesterday, and my wife said, isn't it interesting that she said that she didn't want him to find out rather than she didn't want him to be the killer?
Yeah, I said that.
Because people fall in love with him, that's the thing.
But he not only killed his wife and the maid,
but
he killed 2 people earlier to make it look like a serial killer.
Yeah.
He's an utterly ruthless psychopath.
But they've fallen in love with him thanks to the storytelling. Yeah. It's bizarre, isn't it?
And I think the other thing that film does that I think is not used as much as it should be is people changing. A perfect example is Local Hero, where you first meet this guy and he's brash and he's in, I think it's in Houston or somewhere, and he's in his Porsche and he comes over and he's going, and by the end of and you hate him. Yeah. And he's a jerk, and by the end of the film you're really fond of him. Yeah. And it's been so subtle, that arc. Yeah. There's no big change. And I think that's the only medium you can do that. You can't do it on stage. You can't do it in a book. It's film, and it does that wonderfully.
Yeah, that's a great film, isn't it? I watched that again recently.
Yes,
You're right, though. You do really hate that guy when he first turns up.
And by the time the empty telephone box at the end, you're almost in tears.
Yeah, I was. The last time I saw it with that wonderful score as well.
Yes.
With Mark Knopfler.
It is lovely.
I can't listen to that without welling up, actually.
Well, it's so clever because it's just Scottish enough without being campily Scottish. Yeah. It sort of fits with the picture so well.
It does. There's a real heart to that film, isn't there? Yeah, I've got a friend who is an actor in the West End, and he's done a few films and things, and he always finds films a little bit jarring, because with a theatre performance you get to hone it over months and months.
Yes.
Whereas with a film you might have 2 or 3 takes and that's it. And it's your job really to hone that performance, isn't it?
Yes.
So really you are, in a way, an actor yourself.
Well, I said to someone the other day, the most wonderful thing about my job is just watching acting.
Mm.
And I did a film, it was Tracker.
Mm.
There was an Australian who was head of the film board over there, and the New Zealand producer. And there was a scene where this guy who playing an English army officer. Mm. And at the end of it, Ray Winston went over to him and said, "Oh, that was good, mate. That was really nice." And the director and I said, "Wow, it's really nice." And these two, an Australian and New Zealand, said, "Well, that's no good, is it? I mean, he doesn't sound English at all." And I said, "I actually thought he was." Huh. And they wouldn't have it. And I thought, but I look at, and they didn't think he was a very good actor. And I said, I've watched film all day. And that's what I do for a living, is look at performance. And I thought it was good. Mm. And I know it's good. And you wonder where they were coming from.
Yeah. Do you prefer that an actor give a broad range of performance, or do you prefer that they try to hone it and therefore you've got less choices?
I'd rather them go for one performance.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, what I was saying earlier, where you can go into all the NG takes, I'll often cut it with the selected takes and then start to look. And you'll find that there's enough variation that if you find, I really like that, and you put that in, it unbalances everything else.
Yes.
Because it's not quite the same performance and it doesn't flow
properly.
And you want it, but you can't. And so then you say, well, perhaps I can put a bit more of that in there. And often you can't. It's better to stay where you were.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? I can imagine a situation where a producer might say, "I'll lose that shot," but if you lose that shot, it affects everything else around
absolutely.
it, and suddenly you're you're rebuilding the puzzle.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a film. The last film I did is Postcard Killings. There's a scene where the car landscape, Finland snowscape, and you saw a nice landscape shot, little car going along. Then you go inside it and realise it's our two protagonists, and they talk for a moment, and you go outside, more landscape. And then you're aware there's a car following them. And the producer showed it to the lead actor, and he said he didn't like that bit, so they just took it out. So you have no idea who's in the car or the significance of the people following them. And there was no way they were going to let me undo it. Not happen. It had to be that way. But it made no sense at all. It lost a lot of its just ordinary narrative, so that the punter watching knows what's going on, who's where, things like that.
It's funny, isn't it? What's given importance? Oh, the actor decided it was no good.
Yeah.
Out it comes. Yeah, strange.
And one needed the presence of them in the car just to know, just as car and landscape. Oh, it's them. And then out, there's another car. Hey, what's this? It's storytelling, yeah.
You mentioned earlier about Jagged Edge, about how you wanted that insert of the typewriter to kind of make the scene work. Is it common for you to ask for a shot to make an edit work?
With Richard and with Frank Rodham, I would shoot them normally.
Oh, you would, second unit as well.
But just sort of inserts and things like that. With Richard, I'd done a couple of films where I did all the second unit.
Really?
Which was great fun.
Yeah. Do you ever get back your stuff into the edit and think, "Oh, damn it, I should have done this or that"? Or have you always been pleased with it?
It's true, because one of the things I didn't know, I directed a horror film years ago, and it didn't go well. It wasn't any good. And what I did learn from it was much more idea about how directors feel about their work and how unhappy they are, often with things that work really well. And so it made me much kinder, to directors, because often they're really worried about a scene. And I say, no, it's going to work really well. It's fine. It's but they bring the business of making that, a difficult scene with the actor being cross or something went wrong.
Yeah, the baggage. Yeah.
And of course, I don't see it with baggage. I just see the performance.
I've spoken to a number of editors now, and some of them have spoken about how a particular editing piece of software is the one for them. I know Colin Gowdy mentioned that when he first started, Lightworks was great for drama, but Avid was better for documentaries, and he said because of the way they were structured.
Oh, right.
Each editing package has its own, shortcomings and advantages. But is there one that you've stuck to over the years?
Yes, I really like Avid. It was the first one I learned, and I just understood it because it was like the way I cut on film. So the two flatbed machines suddenly had the two monitors, and you're hunting on one and building the cut up, and that made perfect sense to me. I hated Lightworks with those silly symbols.
Well, there was like a shark.
Yes, I'm not 8 years old. I'm a middle-aged man. I want buttons. And I love the way that Avid, you touch a button and it looked as if it was moving.
Yeah.
It was a little graphic, just a lovely little touch.
Yeah. Lightworks was often enjoyed by editors because of the controller, though, I believe.
Because of the tiller, but that's a security blanket, isn't it?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Because ultimately the tool, it doesn't matter.
No, I don't think it makes any difference. I particularly like it. I did learn Final Cut Pro. I never got on with it. I liked it. I could use it.
The more recent version, 10 or 7?
With that,
no, a lot of people didn't.
No, but
they went off in a very different direction, didn't they?
And I just found I recutting a documentary about turtles that they wanted to make into a film like March of the Penguins. And I'd come in on a Monday morning and everything had come unrendered. And I'd have to spend 2 hours, waste 2 hours just rendering everything to have a picture. And it was, obviously it was something to do with Final Cut Pro. But I found it's not, to me it's more for people who know computers rather than people who are editors, where the Avid was designed by editors. And I just find I love it, and it's got better and better as it goes on.
You want to get to the point, I guess, where it's sort of invisible.
Oh, yes.
And you're just, it's like touch typing almost,
Exactly.
Or playing a piano or something. You're not thinking about the notes.
Yes. And it's just, I really like it. I know there's a new one out, but I don't want to learn a new one.
Did you ever get your hands on Edit Droid back in the day? That was around.
I did. I did play with one. It didn't exist when I was doing Jedi.
Right.
But they had a demo in London, and I saw it. And it's, I think, I don't swear to this, I do think it influenced Avid.
Yeah.
But of course the Laserdisc idea is ridiculous because it took so long to get, you couldn't get them overnight.
Yeah.
It took days, so you couldn't get the rushes. And that was the weakness. And then of course it was sidetracked by the fact that storage got so good that people could actually store a picture.
Yeah, George Lucas ahead of his time once again,
yes,
really.
He was.
But I guess if he hadn't have pushed in that direction, it might not have happened so quickly.
I think so. They were working on it when I was in California at Sprockets, but they were working on a lot of things. ILM was just started doing digital and actual CGI, rather than just smoothing things out. Actually, the other one I've never used. I've seen people use it. What's that system with lots of VHS tapes?
Oh, it wasn't the one that Kubrick ended up.
It might have been. I'm trying to think. Montage.
Yes.
And you'd have like the same rushes on 10 VHS tapes.
Yeah.
And you would make the cut, and so it was all written up. So they'd be whizzing like mad to show you. And if sometimes they couldn't get to. None of them could get to the right place at the right time. Right. But they'd got the idea of non-linear, but the technology wasn't there.
Yeah.
And it was such a, I've got a soft spot for it because they were trying so hard. And of course the best thing that ever happened was Final Cut Pro, because it forced the price down.
Yes.
I mean, I did something last year from home. And you can download it. I've got a big iMac, and you can download it for a year for 250 quid.
Yeah, whereas Lightworks, when it first came out, was like 60 grand or
yes,
something. The price of a flat.
I bought an Avid, and I think it cost 39,000.
Wow. Jeez.
And that was huge monitors, and the computer and the keyboard. But you had to then rent storage.
Yeah.
And,
Big RAID, yeah.
and there's 9 gig drives. I think they were 9 gig drives. They held 10 minutes, and then the linkage was all.
You had to sort of daisy them all together, didn't you? Yeah. All right, one final question then. What still remains for you in terms of editing? What would you love to edit? You said you'd love to edit a Western.
Yes, I'd love to do a good Western, yeah.
Well, let's make that happen. Come on.
And I like some of those unusual Westerns. Eagle's Wing.
Yeah.
It's a lovely film.
Yeah.
And, of course, The Searchers. Although I'm always irritated with The Searchers because all the weapons are wrong. I know it's pedantic. But
that is a pretty big thing, though, isn't it?
Yes, but it starts... They say it 3 years after the Civil War, because they say, where have you been for 3 years? And it's 5 years before the end of the film, so that's 68 to 73. And yet they've all got weapons that were post-1873. I'm a bit pedantic about it. And it annoys me, because they must have known and not cared.
Yeah. Nobody's going to notice that, you can imagine them saying, yeah.
And I love, for instance... The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, where all the weapons are absolutely, spot on.
Yeah.
Someone cared about that.
Yeah, it's important, that stuff, though, isn't it? I think anything that's going to take you out of the film should be avoided, shouldn't it? Yeah.
But the other side of it, Searchers, is it is such a wonderful dark Western. I think the most interesting thing John Wayne ever did.
Yeah, hugely influential as well.
Yeah. I love it.
What's the last film that you saw that you enjoyed? A new film?
I haven't seen one for a while. I'm just planning now to get it.
Same.
I'm not a big person for watching them on TV, and I'm just getting ready to start. And the other thing is that BAFTA has been closed for 2 years while they rebuild it. So I haven't, because I used to go there often once a week, and see something, and then you'd see people you knew. But I haven't. There's a lot of things I want to see at the moment. And we've got a new cinema around the corner here, and I noticed it was, because of the wonderful world of digital, they were showing The Maltese Falcon.
Oh, brilliant.
And I thought, I realised I've never seen it in a cinema.
I don't think I have, actually, no.
And it'd be interesting to see just, the lighting and things like that, because I remember it's a stylish-looking film.
Yeah, that would be good to see. It's interesting, though, isn't it, all these 4K prints now, where they're sort of under more scrutiny than they would ever have been on film, in a way.
Someone pointed out to me that our work print, we'd get a first answer print, but then they'd make an intermediate and they with no joins in. So all the prints, and the quality drop was quite huge. And a final little thing I'll tell you is about 4 or 5 years ago they redid, Pete Townsend redid the music of Quadrophenia, and we put it onto the film. And it was for DVD release. But the difference in the quality, and I hadn't realised because we didn't know about it, but they recorded initially on an 8-track machine, and then transferred it onto a 16-track and added some instruments, and then to a 24-track and added some instruments. Then they'd mixed onto magnetic 3-track for me, and then we'd put it in. So it was 5 generations. And it sounded fine to us, but when he went back and he went straight into the digital world, the difference in the quality was astounding. God. And we couldn't have done it. I mean, there's no way we could.
No.
That was the only process there was. And in some ways, I think we hurried into the digital world initiating shooting on it and things a bit quicker than we should have done, because its real wonderful thing is its copying ability, the fact that everything is the same.
Yeah, you don't lose that. You have that generational loss. Yeah.
And I still love it. The last film I did was on film.
You didn't cut on film, no. You still scanned into the Avid, yeah.
I still got. I've got the American joiner that I cut to Return of the Jedi.
Have you really? How cool. That's nice.
I showed it to my assistant. He had no idea what it was for. He's 28 or something. He'd never used anything like that. He'd always been in the digital world.
Yeah. That's a hell of a leap, though, wasn't it? I mean, you got 100 years or so doing it one way, and then suddenly you leap into this whole other realm.
And a lot of the other things I think are unnecessary. Like they started having, digital boards and things like that. You don't need. clapper.
Yeah, it's just
very
for the
pleasant.
sound, yeah.
And I used to love, sometimes you see rushes of musicals, and it'd be a wide shot, and a man would come out with this enormous board and clap it.
Yeah, there's one on Return of the Jedi, actually, for I think the scenes where they're fighting on the steps, Vader and Luke, and this guy comes in with this clapperboard it's like a coffee table.
That's right, yeah. Dunk.
Yeah.
There's a nice little story of Brian Tofano. I was doing this Western, and he was very clever, very experienced. Two riding to camera on horses, galloping, and it's on a long lens. So I turned up, and he got me and a whole lot of other people, and had us standing, 100 yards, 50 yards apart or something. And so we'd drop our arm when they came past us, because it helped the focus puller.
Right.
And which I thought was clever. But he was really severe about rushes if the boards, night shooting, if you couldn't read the boards clearly. And really, because of course the editing room was always upset about it, but he was just as cross. And he said to them in front of us, he said, "There's no point in putting boards on unless the editing department can read them." And it was quite tough around it, because it's so important.
Yeah. Well, that's a problem I hear about digital these days, where directors don't even cut; they just keep it going and say, "Give us another go at that line. Have another go," and you've just got these 30-minute long.
Yes, and I think they also at the film school. I used to work occasionally at the National Film School, and several of the editors complained about the enormous amount of rushes, because they have a very tight schedule. They're doing about 8 films a year, I think, on different projects, and they haven't got time. And I felt they ought to say you limit the amount of that they can shoot. It just seemed I could see what they meant. It's just sort of you've got somebody who gets enough for a 90-minute feature, and you're doing a 10-minute short.
Yeah.
It's a bad discipline.
You've got to have some limitations, haven't you? Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know whether they don't do it there, but at the London Film School, until very recently, they used to get cut on 16mm, something that was actually shot.
Yeah,
on
get that discipline.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I thought that's quite interesting.
Yeah, it's important. I, as I said, I work in live television, and I sometimes get camera operators to go out and shoot certain things for me. And it became quite clear that I had to be very specific about what I wanted. Otherwise, you just get reams of stuff.
Oh, yes, yes.
And then it takes you 10 times longer to find the shot you need.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Of course, and I think the director, if they do that, they lose out, because in the end, the editor won't look at it all.
Yeah. Something will get lost inevitably.
Because they haven't got time. It's not physically possible.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you think the difference is between English and American editors in terms of their style and the kind of their life within the industry?
There is a difference. I have to say one thing: they have more status in America than editors have in England now. But one of the things is what I call shooting down the line. If there's a wide shot and you go into a close-up, say there's 2 people talking, and one's got his back to you and the other one's face to you, they would go for the one you could see when they went into the close shot. I would go for the one who's back, always. And I don't know, I learnt by doing so, that this is something I do, I don't know whether anyone else does it, but I would always be doing it. But I think Walter Murch once said that he called that European editing.
Right.
Because the American would always go straight for in, which is a harder cut to do, because you've got to get the continuity spot on.
Yes, yeah.
Whereas I quite like the fact that you'd see, say, 2 people in a wide talking, and the one you can see ends, and the other one starts speaking, and then you cut round to him.
Yeah.
It's the way I would do it.
Yeah.
And I think it's peculiar to the English.
Interesting. I'll look out for that.
And I've also done films in America and Italy, and one of the things I noticed in France and Italy, that they when they mix, they bring. It's worth next time you see a foreign film, they have the dialogue much further forward than I would ever have it. Now Americans these days often have it so far back.
Oh, I see.
So sometimes you can hardly hear what they're saying.
Yeah, right.
But the other side of it is in Italy and France, it's very far forward. It's almost like voiceover, and sometimes I find it quite disturbing, because it's almost too close to be coming from the lips.
Right, yeah.
It's too clear of the background. But I mean, to me, film editing, as we know it, is an American invention.
Yes.
More than anything else. I mean, obviously influenced by Russia, but it's an American invention really more than anything else. And I think we learned it because between the wars we made so many American films, were made in quotaphons. And we learnt their ways. But, I mean, my very close friend of mine, Conrad Buff, but he has much more status than I do as an editor. And by American directors and producers treat him much more seriously than they do English ones. But he lives he doesn't have a different lifestyle. He's probably richer than me, but he lives a very normal life as we all do.
It's interesting you say that though, because I think sometimes just being British has its own sort of cachet with Americans in a way.
Does.
There's a level of sophistication that they feel they don't have in a way.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
And there's something, I was writing something about Jagged Edge and I couldn't remember the name of the apprentice on it, so I looked on IMDb, and he's now quite a successful editor. And I saw a little link to me, so I went, what's that? And it would quote him saying that I had said to him, I had said to him, I am a punter, I am bought a ticket, I am sitting in the dark. What do I want to see next, or what should I see next, are the decisions you should be making. What I was really saying is, it's not about showing off or being fancy or being clever, it's about storytelling. And I mentioned this to Conrad. He said, I remember you saying that. I said, it's just a throwaway, but I do think that it's very easy to get sidetracked away from the key to the whole thing is storytelling. Now, if you can tell it in a nice, slick way and do something dramatic, like that wonderful change we were talking about on Wind River, where she knocks on the door and you go back in time.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. But all the time, the prime thing is storytelling.
Yeah, perfect. That's a brilliant end note. Well, thank you so much, Sean. I really enjoyed our chat. It was very kind of you to give your time. And
no, it's interesting.
From somebody on this side of film, thanks for the wonderful work you've done, because I've enjoyed it immensely.
Lovely. No, I don't like getting old. I suddenly find myself realising that this is all the past.
yeah, it's difficult looking back, but you should be proud of what you've done.
I am.
Yeah.
And in the end, it was about 50 films, I think.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my chat there with editor Sean Barton. Sean took me up to his office after the recording finished there and showed me the splicer he used on Return of the Jedi, as well as original Quadrophenia, Jagged Edge and Return of the Jedi posters. The Jedi one was a rather cool Japanese alternative design. I really did enjoy my morning with Sean, and I'm eternally grateful to him for giving his time. If you'd like to see how happy I was that morning, check out Filmumentaries on Instagram and you'll see a photo of Sean and I in which I am beaming. We just had such a nice chat, such an easygoing guy. I'm very humble, but also very knowledgeable and very willing to impart his knowledge and his experience. So if you're making a Western and you want an editor, Sean is available. He's still got it. He could do it. Coming soon on the Filmumentaries podcast. Well, Joe Johnston has gone quiet on me. He's a busy man, I know that, so I'm going to get back in touch with him soon. It's kind of a fine balance with trying to convince people, but also not hassling them too much. The Phil Tippett lead also went dry, despite hearing back from his team and sounding positive, so I'm going to follow that up again soon. Phil, of course, has got a movie out at the moment, so I was hoping to catch him for that. I have, however, been in touch with British composer Daniel Pemberton. He's keen, and unlike the others, he's asked me to keep hassling him if he doesn't reply. So I'm going to do that. You'll know Daniel's work from Spider-Verse, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which was great soundtrack. Also recently, I enjoyed his score in Molly's Game, a whole plethora of movies that Daniel's worked on. He's got a really interesting style that isn't, the norm of what we think of when we think of a film score. So I'm really excited to have him on. And there's a possibility, as he's not far away from me in London, that we might do that one in person as well. I've also been talking to sound designer Mark Mangini again about coming back on to talk about the sound work on Denis Villeneuve's Dune. It's out here on October the 21st, I think. So I, of course, want to see it first. So I'm hoping to get both Mark Mangini and Theo Green, who supervised Dune, with him. Looking forward to that very much. Oh, one small matter, the Rogue One poster. So there was a competition I put on Twitter. You had to quote tweet my pinned tweet, which was about my previous podcast with Colin Gowdy, editor Colin Gowdy, who worked on Rogue One. Thanks to the 31 of you that entered the draw by quote tweeting my pinned tweet with a nice message about the podcast. And I'm going to do the draw right now. So I've got all of your names here on a list. There's a random generator website, and I'm going to press the go button. It's going to pick one. So let's see. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Congratulations to, I hope I'm saying this right, Angel de Jorge. Lovely. He's a long-term follower, actually, and big supporter. So well done, mate. There'll be a IMAX poster of Rogue One coming to you. So drop me a DM and give me your address, and I'll get it out to you. Congratulations. Keep an eye on Twitter at JamieSWB, also on Facebook.com/Filmumentaries, also on Filmumentaries.com, Filmumentaries on Instagram, because I'll be running other competitions throughout this run of podcasts. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so again for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.
Yeah, bring him in.
You think that'll work that way?
Yeah, I think it'll work very well.
I'll do it without moving my mouth, so if you decide not to use it.
Red light, let's go.
Well, I tell you, Jabba's getting very good.
Is he?
Yes, he's getting very good. He's almost star now.
Oh, good.
We have to be very nice to him.